You were on your way home when you died. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless.
All right. Here we are. Episode 2
This is an experiment.
of This is an Experiment podcast. I am Adonis Tumin,
And I am Nick Mutunga.
and we will delve into the short story by Andy Weir called The Egg.
Shout out Andy.
Shout out Andy. So, to begin, let's give a little bit of a summary of what the egg is. Nick, you want to give these fine people
God damn it. Okay, so I guess we can start with this. I hope you heard the introduction where my beautiful voice expertly very deep and just manly expertly.
You should read ebooks.
I should.
You should be.
I was thinking about that. Well, I've been told before that I have a radio voice.
You have a radio voice.
So here we are podcasting, and it's pretty much radio. It's the same thing. Anyways, you heard the beginning of a short story where you are driving, as many of us do. Get to work. We go drink drinks and then drive drunkenly, which is not okay. Get an Uber always. Anyways, you got in a car accident and you died. And that was it. Nothing particularly special, nothing extreme, but you died nonetheless. So from there, you enter a different dimension, we'll say. We'll call it a dimension, whatever you want to consider it to be.
We could call it the afterlife.
We could call it the afterlife if you would like to call it that. Your consciousness enters a different space than what you were in before you died.
Perfect. Love it.
So then you meet a being, and that being begins to explain to you what has happened to you, what will happen to you. And the short story kind of gives a concept or an idea that is not, I think, like standard within like religious beliefs, or
it's not a conventional idea.
Exactly. I think it kind of pulls from some
for sure
religious concepts, but it's definitely one in its own, and it's very interesting and something I kind of enjoy to think about as a possibility, because it's reassuring in a way.
Yeah. So, and just to kind of piggyback off what you said, you basically talk with God, or so that's what you think at the time.
Right.
And then you come to find out that this God is a fragment, kind of like you, except this fragment or this being has lived through all these different lives and gained the knowledge and experiences of different individuals throughout humanity's existence.
Right.
And that's kind of the concept of the egg. You are still a yolk, and when you move on to the afterlife, you find out that your consciousness will actually go into another life, and you will experience that life. And in the story, the you, is having a conversation with God. And this person asks, was I Abraham Lincoln? God says yes. He asks, well, what about Adolf Hitler? God says yes. What about Jesus? God says yes. What about the Holocaust victims? Yes. So you start to question, so how can I be two different people at the same time? Or three or four or a handful? How is that possible? The idea that I... and I'm sure you can explain your perspective of it, but how I see it is you are this consciousness experiencing itself.
Right.
And this consciousness, this giant, I don't know, this constant, and the common denominator in existence is just fragmented within different beings. So, for example, you and I are the same thing, but we are the same consciousness outside of this physical shell, and we are experiencing ourselves. Like, I am you, and you are experiencing yourself through me, and vice versa.
Right.
And so that is the whole premise of how I received it. That's how I received it. I mean, I'm sure there's different interpretations. What was your your take.
No, so I think building off what you said, I'll kind of go into another way that I look at it, but building off what you said to provide an analogy, we can look at like the neurons in a brain. So we could think of ourselves as individual neurons, but in and of itself, it is still a brain. So each human being is a neuron, and the culmination of all of humanity, all of those conscious beings are sub units of a being, which could be a brain growing within an egg. And so that's kind of how, like, I feel like a good way to kind of, because it's kind of confusing looking at like, okay, I am me and I am also you. That can be confusing. Whereas it's like, we are kind of both a part of something bigger. And I think that's like a good way of bringing an analogy into this. I don't know. I would also say that there's an alternative way to look at it is that like time kind of doesn't play a factor in things, because I mean, for example, I think in the end of the story, he says you are going to now be reincarnated into a Chinese girl in 300 something BC. So he's like, so time doesn't matter either? Nope. Because to these beings that are being developed in the egg, time is not how we perceive time. And so I think that makes sense in that the egg is, I mean, within an egg, the egg doesn't know what time, even if you look at like an egg in real life, like a chicken egg or whatever an egg you're looking at, that
concept of existence is different.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't understand until it's out and it's hatched, right?
Right.
And so being, objects or consciousness within the egg, we don't understand time as it truly is or what it could truly be. We have an idea when we're placed in these bodies, but we don't know what it means to those higher beings that we're incubating to become.
That's a really good point. I actually really like that analogy about, so we're essentially, just to see if I got it right. So you're saying that, for example, you and I and everyone else living in this apartment complex are the neurons,
Mm-hmm.
or everyone in this world rather is our neurons.
Mm-hmm.
And then the greater consciousness is the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So we can expand on that a little bit more. So let's say, have you heard the phrase "as above, so below"? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard it, but have you looked into the meaning or seen what the meaning is?
No.
So in essence, as above, so below. It continues. It goes, as above, so below, so within, as without. And so what that means is everything is kind of uniform. So there's like building blocks to everything. So as you are inside, so is the universe. So as you have neurons building up to a brain,
Mm-hmm.
you have planets building up to a solar system.
Yeah. Okay.
As you have humans on Earth, you have solar systems within a galaxy.
Right.
So you see
Mm-hmm.
that concept. So just to kind of have a little thought experiment, what is to say that you and I, or this known universe, isn't just another neuron inside around a billion other neurons in a brain?
Yeah. There's nothing to say that that's not the case.
There
I mean,
isn't.
that's what's crazy. Like, it's all relative, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, it could very well be that we are. I mean, I've thought about that. I feel like for a really long time, thinking about like we could be like small like subparticles, and because time is relative as well, like our existence could be literally like nothing to some other being which we are floating within. I think I've seen like paintings or drawings or depictions of this where it's like the universe is like painted inside like of a human form. And so it's like, what if there's this giant being where all these things are going on and our existence is within that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's honestly a really interesting way to look at it. So then you ask yourself, okay, so what about that being? Could that
Exactly.
being also be?
Yeah.
Then it's like, how big can it get?
Yeah. Does it ever stop?
Does it ever stop? And was
Right.
there ever a point of origin?
Right. Well, and that's another thing is like, now see this, I think that's where this story brings comfort, is it is an origin story. So the idea that humanity is hurting itself through wars and doing terrible things to each other while also doing rewarding things and maturing, right? It's maturing through all these experiences that humanity is going through to become this higher being. That's an origin story. And I think humans find comfort in an origin story because it sets a beginning, right? We can't understand the idea of a begin or of origin or what was before a beginning and after an end. So we don't understand forever. What is forever? So again, that's something, I don't know, we'll never really truly be able to understand, I don't think. And I think that's why this kind of brings comfort, because it is giving an origin to your existence is part of something greater.
Yeah, I like that. And then you could also say, I feel like humans in general, they fear the unknown, right? They fear an end to all things. So what's to say, if there really is ever an end per se? Because according to the story, right, like as soon as you die, you go back into another body.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, sure, you don't really remember your previous life,
Right.
but nevertheless, it's like a continuous cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So was there ever really a beginning?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's interesting because, the way, if we were to break this down and into the logic of this, theoretically, it would be the same being with this constantly happening, because
Like
obviously
the
people
bootstrap have you heard of the bootstrap, or is it called the grandfather paradox?
where if you
Where you add, so there's like a loop happening,
Yeah.
and when you add an outside variable that wasn't a part of the loop previously,
Yeah.
when you add that variable into this loop,
uh-huh.
that variable is now there as it's always been there.
Yeah. Okay.
So that, I feel like that's kind of what how we could view this story, the egg.
Right.
Like we're in a constant loop of existing and non-existing.
Yeah. Yeah, because people are dying constantly, and then people are being born constantly. The population's increasing, so if we're looking at it that way, then there's more people being born than dying. Is that us maturing? Is that is the population growing not because we've figured out how, or because we figured out medicine and things like that, and all these things, and we've prolonged lives and things like that, and therefore the population of this earth is a representation of humanity's existence within the egg expanding? Is it growing? Is it maturing? And that's why the population's growing. It's a reflection of the egg's growth and maturing. Think about it. If you go back thousands of years, how many cavemen were on the earth 100,000 years ago? Not that many.
Not yet.
Now we have 7 billion. So, and I think it makes sense as well, because we are conscious beings. Look at animal populations. They haven't grown like we have. So I think the consciousness is kind of, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of almost a reflection of the growth of the egg. And maybe we are going to mature and eventually become this higher being that we're meeting every time that we die, every time every human being dies. And then to bring in the idea of the loop, it is constant looping between death and life, and death and life, and death and life.
So if we're in a constant loop, then that must mean this figure of God is also a part of that constant loop. And if not, at what point does this God leave the loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the story, it seems like this individual that has gone through various life cycles is separated from this from your time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at what point does this being leave, or is he a part of that life cycle? Because imagine, right? How many lives has this individual gone through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say countless, right? Let's say an infinite number.
Right.
At what point will every individual become, let's say all these individuals grow, right? All these egg, and we'll call them egg individuals, and then we'll call the God individual, we'll call them God individuals. At what point, or is there a point where all the egg individuals become all God individuals? Do you see
No,
what I'm saying?
I don't think. I mean, so I mean, we could get into like aliens or whatever, but I think where there are, let's say that this applies to conscious beings only.
Okay.
So where there are conscious beings, beings that are self-aware, beings that can learn morals and things like that, and right and wrong, where that is existing, where that's happening, whether it be here on Earth or wherever it is, I think that's an egg. And so I think because the universe is technically infinite, it's always expanding, wouldn't there just be eggs everywhere?
Yeah, it's a possibility. But just for the sake of Earth,
Mm-hmm.
do you think there will ever come a time where it kind of stops in terms of how many lives you can go into? Because like their concept of time, right, it's different than ours.
Right, it is. But I think that whatever we can't understand that, we won't know. But I think when it is, that will be when the egg hatches.
And becomes God. Or
Right. The deity, the figure,
deity.
whatever it is, that external being that has already been through that process. Because I think even in the story, the deity says, I have already gone. I've done what you're doing, basically. I was an egg myself once. And then you will become me when you're done with this.
So then that means at one point was he also in the cycle like of Earth lives?
Right. He at one point, that deity was a conscious, was a collection of conscious beings sometime, somewhere along space and time on some planet.
So that means that God was also the individual he's talking to. So he's talking to himself essentially.
It could be interpreted that way. It could be.
Because in the story it says there's more like me.
Right.
You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean there's different cycles of existence on Earth, or is this only was the story only like, was the concept like only Earth?
I mean, I think it's more so just like existence in general. So that's why I kind of said like I guess we could look into like apply this to alien races or things like that. I don't like saying aliens because people get all weird about it, but like
they think the bald, gray, big eyes. Yeah.
Something. But I'm just saying like across space and time, there was probably some other conscious existence or conscious beings. So, yeah, I don't know. I think these deities or gods were just as we are a group of 7 billion people, whatever eventually will hatch out of the egg, and humans, what we call humans, let's say there was another humanoid race or something, and they evolved, and then it was the same process of every humanoid was a piece of the consciousness within another egg. And then that egg hatched and became this deity that's now talking to the human version of that. Okay,
I see what you're saying. So we're assuming that there were different species across whatever the universe.
Right.
But the evolution was similar.
Mm-hmm. Or it could be that it's because we don't understand time and time is relative, that it was that was also humanity in some other dimension or another time frame.
Yeah.
And now it's just happening again. And so maybe it is what you were saying where he's talking to himself.
That's true. Yeah. Like the whole theory of when we see aliens, it'll just be us from the future.
Mm-hmm.
Cuz have you heard that theory? Like if we ever meet aliens, it's just us from the future.
Yeah, it could be because
that makes sense.
I mean, that would be assuming that. I feel like if that's the case, I would be kind of saying that we're the only ones here, because then we would have figured out the ability to travel through space and time, and then I guess only we would have known where we were at that space and time, like basically like the coordinates in like 4 dimensions. So like the 4-dimensional coordinates of us now, the future versions of ourselves would be able to figure that out and like visit us as aliens.
Interesting. We're slowly starting to go into time. I want to
Yeah.
stay away from that for a different podcast.
Yeah,
episode.
no, definitely.
So just to go back, what's your concept of so for when you say alien, I'm assuming you mean like a higher being or something not of Earth,
Right.
not necessarily fitting the Hollywood
No,
standard
absolutely
of
not.
what an alien is.
No, I just think that I'm just saying that if this story says there are more like me, and this deity or God or whatever it is telling the human race that it is growing and becoming and maturing and stuff, I feel like it has to be insinuating that there were other species that were conscious beings, because it's like consciousness, right? Like this consciousness is inserting itself into every individual mind within the planet. And so I think that was happening elsewhere or at some other time. Maybe it was us, but at a different time. And that's why there are others like him.
That begs a bigger question. Why?
Who knows? The crazy part is, I think on here somewhere, maybe it explains like in the story, but like this mind is only capable of knowing so much. The mind that each body on the planet, like the consciousness that's being put into it can only see through the lens of the brain that's in that body. So like it's limited, and that's why we can't understand that we're a part of a bigger consciousness, or that time is relative, or that what forever means and things like that. So I don't know. I don't think we could even begin to guess what the purpose of all of it is. Are those beings just trying to procreate and survive as well? I don't know. Maybe.
So, and another way to look at this story is it's kind of like a introspection of what human life is, right? You look within yourself rather than looking out. And I know in like towards the end of the story, I believe the God figure, when he was telling the human egg, whatever, he was telling it, every time you're hurting another person, you're victimizing yourself. And every time, you're loving somebody, you're loving yourself. Happy, sad. It's all self-inflicted. Like the emotions that you put onto others are self-inflicted onto you because of, according to the story, it's just the consciousness experiencing itself. So that's another view, another way we can look at it, kind of like an introspection of what humanity is. Because if you look at it, right, the common denominator between everything within humans is that we are human, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Aside from race, aside from skin pigmentation, aside from our religion, where we live, the flag that we live under, we are human beings.
Right.
The race that we are is the human race, first and foremost. Everything else is a subcategory. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
Right? A flag is a nationality. A place you were born and the culture you are raised in is an ethnicity. And the skin pigmentation, it has to do with genes, but sometimes it has to do with the area you're born, the climate you're born in, right? Because if you're darker, that means you were born under the sun, and your skin adapts to that,
right? So
it develops the pigmentation that it needs, so you don't the UV rays don't destroy your DNA. And I think that's what Andy Weir was trying to kind of one of the things he was trying to kind of address. At the end of the day, we are all humans. So these wars that we're going to, these fights, these like political disputes and all that, we're just hurting ourselves. Right? Because we are all humans. At the end of the day, we are all on the same planet. And if we destroy this planet, we destroy ourselves first and foremost. The planet will be fine, right?
Yep.
The planet's been through way fucking worse.
Yeah.
With the giant comet that hit the dinosaurs. I mean, there's been what, 3 or 4 extinctions?
Mass extinctions, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the Earth is still here.
Yep. It's still chilling.
Fine. And a testament to that fact is, after it's gone through all of that, it has somehow managed to balance itself back out to produce more life.
Right.
Us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what ultimately the end of the egg is. It's us realizing that we are all the same. Sure, we might not be philosophically, yes, we're all, a consciousness, but the root of it, like the earthly viewpoint that we can take, is that at the end of the day, we are all the same.
Yeah.
And if I hurt you, I'm just hurting myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of you and I, we share the same blood. We share the same DNA. I mean, I feel like geneticists and biologists will argue that.
Yeah.
But at a broad, I'm talking about it from a broad perspective.
Right.
We share a lot more similarities than we share differences.
Yes.
And I think that's ultimately what the egg was trying to address.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I liked that correlation between the earthly view and what this guy's trying to say. I mean, yeah, we could definitely use that as like a call for peace. Can be used as, I mean, I think religions have been built off of less logical things. So
yeah,
this is very interesting
not
for
to
me.
point any names, but Scientology.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Tom Cruise.
Great actor, but
yeah.
I mean, come on.
Come on. So, no, yeah, but this is a very interesting story by Andy Weir. I think there's a YouTube video depiction.
Yeah, I have it right here. I don't know how the heck to pronounce that channel's name, but it starts with a K. It's like Kurzgesagt something.
Okay, well, maybe we can put it in the description of this episode.
Yeah, we could.
Watch the video.
Yeah, I can't pronounce it. It's Kurzgesagt. Kurzgesagt.
Yeah.
I'll put the name in the description. This, just to kind of give a shout out to this channel, they actually go into interesting topics as well, and they create really, really well-made animations. I believe it's one video a month or so, because they really do take their time with the animations, and they do their due diligence in research. And they got permission from Andy Weir to make this to make the egg animation. So I'll definitely put the details and where to find them in the description of this episode of the podcast. And I mean, all in all, I think, yeah, so we definitely shared some interesting perspectives on ways that the egg could be perceived.
Yeah, interpreted.
And I think that's ultimately what Andy Weir might have wanted. I'm sure, he had
his idea.
A main interpretation.
Yeah.
But I think he also wanted to leave it to the reader and now viewers on how to interpret it.
What to take away from it. How does it influence your view of the world? So yeah.
So I mean, about to be 29 minutes in.
Dang, that's crazy.
Didn't even feel like it.
I know.
So is there any other tidbits you wanted to throw in?
I don't know. There's like this idea of, I guess I'll just throw this out there. There's this idea that humans are in a dimension that can be compared to a whiteboard. And you can draw a stick figure on the whiteboard and then press a ball onto a whiteboard. And you press it just so it barely touches the wall. And that stick person's only going to see a point. And then you push it all the way onto the wall, and then that stick person will see a line because multiple points of So I like to think of, and I think that's a theory in its own when it comes to dimensions and stuff, but I just want to kind of correlate that to the idea of this consciousness that is growing within the egg, us being that stick person pretty much. So the consciousness in itself is dipping itself into 1 million or 7 billion people, and those 7 billion people can only perceive the things in this dimension a certain way, right? But if you were to pull out, undip per se, all that consciousness from all these 7 billion souls, it would then be able to perceive more. And so I think that's kind of a way to think about how all these different people are one person or consciousness, is it's like getting dipped into 7 billion different bodies. So that's kind of what I wanted to add.
And I think that's a great closing statement. But
all right,
at the end of the day,
this is just an experiment.
Thank you for listening.